Thank you for staying with us. So while the federal government have unveiled the new naira notes, the Central Bank of Nigeria has taken moves to increase its interest rate from 15.5% to 16.5%. The central bank governor, Godwin Emefiele, disclosed this while reading the communique of the last MPC meeting of the year, saying that by raising the rates, it would help to reduce the rising inflation as well as reduce the money supply in the economy. But analysts are saying that this move might slow the economic growth of the country as well as raise the cost of borrowing for businesses while making goods and services more expensive. Joining us in the studio to discuss this possible issues surrounding the decision is a policy analyst, Dikbo Oyewole. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
This morning.
Morning, Dikbo. Good to see you.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Great.
Now, when you look at, this is like the fourth time that the Central Bank of Nigeria is, raising the interest rate to address inflation. But from the look of things, is that really the strategy we need to addressing the inflation the country is facing?
Oh, well, theoretically, it's one of the strategies that would be adopted by economists, but it's mostly a reactionary measure. But however, from what we've seen so far, I mean, just around September, end of Q3, it was increased to 15.5, and now it's grown by 1%. We haven't really seen it work as much as we'd expect it to work, because there are several factors that cause inflation, too much money in the system, and it's part of the reasons why they said they wanted to redesign the naira. But the issue with that was there was too much of that money was hoarded. It wasn't really in circulation. Now, it was out of the banking system, but it wasn't really in circulation because a lot of it was hoarded. Now, that's what they're trying to address. We're saying we want to redesign the notes and then have to mop up a lot of liquidity from the system and all of that. But for me, we still need to focus a lot on production, exports. And I mean, just a very simple analysis from the major commodities that we have in this country. I mean, i.e. petrol, diesel, these are things that affect the cost of transportation. Invariably, they increase the cost of goods and services. You go to the market today, you hear people say that, oh, the dollar is the reason why tomato is more expensive, and then you're asking, what's the correlation between the dollar and Gary? Yes, but either way, if you look at it expansively, in some way it does, because that's what dictates how much we buy the diesel, the petrol, the trucks that bring the goods from the farm, and all of that. Then we have issues of insecurity where people can't go to their farms anymore. We have issues of natural disasters, act of God, flooding, where we saw a lot of poultry being flooded and all. So these are various factors that cause inflation. But the increase of the interest rates, it is reactionary. It is one of those methods, but it isn't a very sustainable one. We have to be able to increase production. It is very, very important to see how we can increase production. And of course, we all know the parameters that need to be in place for production to even exist and for it to increase. So that, for me, is what we should focus on: increasing production and increasing exports.
It looks like the CBN is a little desperate to ensure that it gives some level of more value to this to the naira. Of course, one would understand that, but let's narrow it even down to the issue of the redesigned naira. How this is going to help. Now, a lot of people have said that when about 85% of Nigerian currency is on the streets, people's votes, people's homes, people's pockets, people's streets, and all of that, and you have just about 15% in the banking system, whatever policy the central bank brings is going to be carried or pushed by only the 15%.
Yes.
Right? Not the 85. So at the end of the day, you don't see any impact of anything the CBN comes up with. But this redesign, which will give the CBN an upper hand in having the monies in the system, how sustainable would it be? Recall that on one of the papers this morning, bandits that kidnapped or kidnappers are already demanding monies in
the new redesigned notes.
And the moment that goes that way, of course, you can't trace it anymore.
Yes.
So how effective will this redesigned notes help the issues of inflation?
Temporarily, it might, but along the line, we may find that we may still find ourselves back where we are right now. Because either we like it or not, we're still the transactions we make every single day, they still have to be cash-based. A lot. I mean, transportation, you want to get a bus. How many cities aside from Lagos have the transportation system like the BRT, where maybe you need to get some tickets and all of that? You have the taxis and all, Okadas, the kekes, you go to the markets. I mean, you don't go and buy paper and say you're going with your ATM card, except you're not ready to go home with anything. So these are realities where they can then say, okay, the cashless policy, it's good to say that, but what are the systems in place? Are people being educated? Is that the reality on ground? Can people really relate with it? If the reality on ground doesn't match whatever policies you're trying to make, I'm sorry, you're just speaking English. So those are the things that we need to focus on to see what are the structures we need to put in place. Do we need to educate the populace? While we're educating the populace, what are we putting in place? Are we providing platforms where it is easy for people to even use their SMS platforms to be able to transact? Yes, the banks have that these days, but how many people really trust that system? Because even these days, you buy something online, they're telling you, oh, okay, we have to confirm. You go to a store, you do transfers, they say, oh, we have to wait to confirm. And so are those systems in place? Is it realistic?
We even have the e-naira that a lot of Nigerians are still struggling to
We have the
e-naira
that, unfortunately, a lot of people don't have so much confidence in it. Are we pushing that? What is the efficacy of that? Is it going to be valuable outside these shores? Because, I mean, if it isn't of any serious value, the question is, why am I holding it? Is it a global currency? Why am I holding it? If it can't compete with the paper USD that I have in my hand, then what's the point of it? So these are the issues that I believe that they need to address in the immediate before we start to drive this entire conversation about the cashless policy. Yes, it is good. That's where the entire world is moving to. But we can't just say we are adopting things from the global scene without doing the things that they have done on the global scene. It just doesn't work that way. So right now, we're still with the physical cash of you give me 10 naira, I collect 5 naira, and...
Well, the CBN governor has spoken about redriving the cashless policy moving forward. But you mentioned two critical issues, trust and confidence.
Yes.
Which are critical to whatever policy the CBN comes up with. Why do you think that there is some sort of a breach in trust and that there is no confidence reposed in whatever the CBN comes up with? And how do we build on that? How do we bridge that gap?
Because over time, what we've seen hasn't been, unfortunately, not so much of transparency. I mean, earlier on, we were talking about the expectations we had with the redesigning of the notes and then what we ended up with. I mean, a lot of people were very disappointed when the notes came out and then we saw the samples. And initially, when I saw it, I didn't first see it being handled by the president and officials. So when I first saw the notes, I thought, so maybe it was just one of those ones that people made up online. And then eventually, I saw pictures of it being held by the president and the CBN governor. I said, okay, so this is actually legit and this is what we're having to work with. So yes, managing expectations isn't something that they have been able to do well so far, and that's not just the CBN, but also practically every facet of our government. They haven't been able to manage the expectation of the people quite well, which is where that issue of trust deficit comes in, because they also need to understand that where the people do not trust you, especially where it is a sensitive system like the monetary system, then there is a problem, because you will have an issue of adoption. And if the people do not adopt it, whatever policies you're making, whatever memos you send out, whatever English you're speaking, it will not work. Because also need to understand that even though the naira was printed right here in Nigeria, which is a good thing, it was still printed at a cost. So if policies are made to justify all of that cost, and then people don't trust you to adopt those policies, and then you're saying there are penalties in place, there are certain people that rather go with the penalties because they still don't trust it. So we need to address the issue of trust, which is also why it seems like governance is an issue here in Nigeria, because, I mean, the government says one thing, and then people are like, we don't trust you. And then, unfortunately, more time than not, we also find that the pessimists have always come out to be wiser than the optimists. Because the people that said, okay, you know what, these guys are just wasting our time, they end up being right. So that is where that issue is from. Inconsistency with their track record. Unfortunately, consistency with their inconsistent track record, if I may say that, that is why we have this issue of the trust deficit, and it needs to be addressed at every level of government.
All right. Online, you will see sometimes some receipts. Someone will post a receipt of sometime 1980.
Yes.
Where when they bought a
Flight ticket,
Volkswagen,
British Airways.
exactly, British Airways, or they bought a Volkswagen Beetle car with about 2,000 something. You know,
yes.
And it brings a lot of beautiful nostalgia. But it takes us back to the realities of the time where the dollar and the naira were at par. You know, working at that level. Everyone said it was because Nigeria had almost all the companies here. The production was high. We recall the Bata. In fact, I can't forget the shoes that Momsi bought for me that time.
Bata, I mean, if you weren't wearing Bata in school,
exactly.
You were not wearing
shoes.
You were not wearing shoes.
You were barefoot.
Class.
You were barefoot.
But the point there is, all of these companies and all of that, so many of them either some folded up, and others left the country, relocated, and so on. Now, we're left with the issue of everything we have to import, everything we have to import. It takes us back to the realities of production.
Yes.
We're not producing enough to sustain our economy, not to talk of exporting to earn foreign exchange. How do we begin to boost that aspect of things? Recall the government tried to close the borders, to encourage local production at the time. Whether that worked, it's still another thing altogether. Talk to that point.
Well, I hope it didn't bring. I was hoping it wouldn't bring up the issue of the border closure, because I mean, remember that we had
we had a
we had a conversation here for like 2 weeks.
Of course, we
right
did.
here.
Yeah. We did.
Yes, we did, and from the get-go, we had said it was going to be a waste of time, and it was going to lead to a loss of revenue for a lot of businesses. People went bankrupt. I mean, some people ended up in hospitals because of high blood pressure, but that's not what we're talking about today. So yes, we need to be able to drive production, but the primary thing we need to do that, aside from policies, is power. These days, power has been quite epileptic, and even getting petrol or diesel today is also an issue. So even what you are getting from the grid isn't sufficient, and the alternative that you need to power your generator is not
available.
So what production are we really talking about? What production are we talking about? Because you cannot produce anything without power. It's not possible. So we need to be able to address the issue of power. And for me, I think it's quite unfortunate that we're still having these conversations every other time that we talk about it, because, I mean, you ask yourself, are they really listening? But we know that they listen. But the question is, what is being done about it? Are they being deliberate about these issues? Because it's really just simple. It's not rocket science. Even, like my friend will say, rocket science is no longer even rocket science, because a lot of people even do it these days. So the question is, what are they doing to ensure that these things work? Because when we keep saying that once you are able to sort power, certain things just fall in line automatically. And that's what we said. Sort power, the chips fall where they may, literally. And then we get to see what's left on the table.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like
we're dealing with
water will
insecurity.
always find its level.
Water will always find its level. You solve power, you see that certain things that you are trying to deal with, they're no longer issues. Even certain things that even we have as prayer points will not even be prayer points anymore. Because power is there. Once power is there, you are productive as an individual, as an organization.
And Nigerians are hardworking.
And Nigerians are hardworking. I mean, even if you're at home on the weekend and then the power is out, even though you weren't using it for anything, your phone is very charged, no issue, there's this sense of dullness around you. And then the power comes back, you still don't turn it on because you're watching your prepaid units. But the sense that power is there helps your morale and helps you to be productive with whatever you want to do. Even though what you wanted to do was to wash the dishes, which has nothing to do with power. But somehow you're like, okay, maybe if I'm done washing the dishes, maybe I'll go watch TV, and then you end up not even watching the TV. But they need to solve, excuse me, the issue of power. Once you're able to solve that, things fall where they may, and then we say, okay, what is left? Is it insecurity? Is it healthcare? Because even on some level, part of the problems we have in healthcare is power. Where we've seen different reports where people say that, okay, you know what, you want to go deliver a child, you need to fuel their generator, or else they will use torchlight to deliver you with CS. I don't know how that is done in 2022, but unfortunately, that is the reality. So you go into a hospital, you want to get something done, you have to pay for diesel, for petrol, to power the generator. And then we hear that people die. We're still battling mother-child infant mortality rate in 2022, a nation like Nigeria. It just doesn't make any sense. So when we're able to sort power, certain things become clear. Then we know what our real, actual problems are, not just perceived problems. Because I believe a lot of what we have today, well, not a lot, some of what we have today are perceived problems because of the other things we have. I mean, there's a saying in Yoruba that says, and all of that. It says, translation says that if a big problem knocks you down, then the tiny ones will start climbing over you. That's where we are with power. Once we're able to solve power, which is a big problem, and then we're able to stand strong, we stand firm, then we know, okay, these are the little ones. This one maybe just needs some form of intervention. This one just needs some policy. This one just needs some action. But until we get that right, we will keep having these conversations in cycles, and honestly, it is quite exhausting.
All right. We find ourselves in a situation where production, like you have pointed out, we are not there yet, and all that you have mentioned, we are not there yet. What is the picture you foresee? We have just keep increasing the interest rates almost every 2 months. What is the picture that you foresee if we continue on this road where we are not producing and there's no power? Security is also a challenge, yet we keep increasing the inflation to think that we are going to rein in on whatever the issue is with inflation. Where are we headed, really?
Fortunately, that's quite a grim picture. And I mean, like you know, when I say this a lot when we're on this platform, that for those of us that are talk on these platforms, we have a sense of responsibility to also be careful of the things we say so we don't thrust a lot of hopelessness on people. But the truth must be said and reality has to be on ground.
Absolutely.
Right? Eventually, one thing has to give, and it isn't just sustainable. It isn't sustainable because the only way we can rein in inflation, because the interest rates will keep going up because it will have to be a reactionary measure to curb inflation. It's a race. It's a race, and it's done globally. However, internally, what are the things that we can do? We have to be very deliberate about providing power to drive production. Also, favorable policies that ensure that whatever it is that we produce has actual value here first and then abroad. It is very important because until we're able to get that right, we will keep having these conversations over and over again and it will get us nowhere. But the prediction is not something I want to do on air right now. It's not something I want to talk about on air because it won't be, that is what very responsible of me because let me just say it will be a very grim picture. I'll just leave it at that. But something has to give and we just have to be responsible with it because now you've increased interest rates, which is a reactionary measure. It is something that is done globally. So this is not a CBN issue. It's not a Godwin Emefiele issue. But the reality is businesses want to have access to financing that gets that higher interest rates. So what that means is whatever goods I'm selling to you, whatever services I'm providing to you, goes up a notch because I also have to make profit. I have to pay salaries. I won't shut down. I have school fees to pay. I have rents to pay. I have other things to do. Because it goes up, your employer hasn't increased your own salaries, but you have to pay more for my goods and services. So in the end, is the inflation really coming down? Because it then becomes a chicken and the egg situation. But one thing has to give. So that's why I said the increase of the interest rates isn't the only thing that has to be done, and it isn't sustainable in itself. Other things have to be done. Other things have to be put in place to ensure that we're able to move the needle down with regards to our inflation. I mean, if it can be single digits, right now it's 21%, so getting to single digits is quite a distance, but I believe that 1% at a time,
we can get it done. Is that a true reflection of what the inflation rate is, looking at the situation on the ground?
Yes, unfortunately. It may be higher, right? But the fact is, it is a lot out there because you can see it with the cost of transportation, cost of goods and services. That in itself will tell you what the cost of inflation, what the size of inflation is, because things are very expensive. I don't need to tell you. Anyone watching us right now will tell you things are super expensive, super expensive.
In fact, a lot of experts are saying that if you really want to go deep down, the inflation rates might be higher than what has been quoted.
Oh, yes.
And the point there is a lot of people, when it comes to data that is not available, has really compounded the situation where some people are actually working out there, but because they're not captured in the system, so you don't know how to calculate what they're going through or what their successes are.
Yes.
So when all these figures, the mathematics is being worked out, they are not included in the mathematics. So all of those things are there. But one thing I'd like to ask is this issue of multiple exchange rates that we have. The point there is, of course, the CBN or the government recognizes one, which is about 444, volatility is there, 45 today, 444, 445. It goes, it comes, it goes, it comes. But the point there is the most prominent or the most popular amongst the people is the one on the streets, which is the parallel market.
Yes.
Because you can't see it in the banks. So you go there and then you're talking about 700 and, it got to 800, it got to 900 at the time.
It was pushing
and then,
1,000.
Yeah, and then
Had to crash.
it's crashing a little bit. But the volatility, because every day if you're going to change money, you have to call first to know, because the rate is going to be different between yesterday and now.
Price.
In fact,
Good.
the morning price is different
It's different
from
from the evening price.
Yeah.
And then besides that, the price in aggregate might be different from the price in Ikeja.
Yes.
Just by a little,
margin.
The one at the airport might also be different.
Yeah.
So the point there is all of this volatility, how does it compound the situation that CBN is trying to handle?
Well, saying it that way makes it sound like CBN is at the receiving end of it, but how are they responsible for this?
Is a financial situation where the point there is, if the CBN comes up with the policy, for instance, to say, okay, we don't want, recall that there was a time they said we don't want people to spray naira in weddings
Parties.
and all of that.
Yes.
But you go to wedding reception and all, there are people hawking the naira. Clean notes that people are going to. Who is supposed to arrest anybody? Is it me and you that will go there to arrest them to say, no, the CBN said we shouldn't do this and that? But so the point there is that we're talking about policy here. We're talking about the authority here. We're talking about implementation. So the point there is it is still the CBN that has the authority to say, don't do this and don't do that.
Exactly. So with regards to the multiple exchange rates, the question is what's the CBN themselves doing about it? It's not just about certain policies in place. We know for a fact that, you want to go on pilgrim, you get a rate. Pilgrimage, you get a rate. You want to go to school, you get a rate. You want to... And all the effects comes from where? From the CBN. So you're very much aware of this. And what are you doing about it? You're saying you're making policies. Policies that are just on paper but not executed in real life.
They went after Bureau de Change operators.
Yes, they went after them, but how much impact has that made?
Maybe that was why the dollar crashed a little bit.
Yes.
Maybe.
Some people will say it is, but the alternative is this. You went after the BDCs. What accessibility do we have with the banks? Is it very accessible with the banks? Today you have dumb accounts where you have dollar in it. I'm not sure you can withdraw. And in some cases, you can't even transfer to another account in another bank. You have to transfer it to another account within the same financial institution. So what purpose does that serve me? I want to travel, I have to fill Form A, Form this, Form that. There are people abroad right now who are struggling to pay fees. There are people who are losing admissions because they don't have access to FX. And they're going through the proper channels. So when the proper channels don't work, what alternatives do you want to leave people with? So that's what we're saying. The proper systems in place, are they working? Make them work. Who really, in their right mind, wants to go buy dollar for $7.70 when I can get it in the bank for $4.50? We're not even saying $4.45. Say $4.50. I'd rather go for that if it is accessible. Nobody really wants to. That's a serious margin per dollar. Like over 300 naira per dollar. And maybe you want to get 1,000. So look at that margin. That's just ridiculous. So it doesn't make any sense. But we're saying, is it available? Is it accessible? If the answer is no, then we're not being realistic about the conversations we're having. It has to be accessible. You put a limit on it, you tell you that the CBN doesn't have dollar, this person doesn't have dollar. You go to a particular bank, they say, oh, we don't have it in this our branch. The people that have to be calling other branches say, okay, so our customer is coming. The people that's up until the day of their flight, they're still trying to source for FX from their banks because they want to do the right thing. Who even give these
Bureau de Change operators this money in the first place?
Well, that is part of the question, because the issue there is,
and I'm looking at you to
answer that.
Yeah, so
there are reports that, of
where does
course,
it come from?
It comes from the banks. There are reports that it comes from the bank. So, in fact, there have been reports of round tripping.
Yes,
Yes.
but
You know,
the
with
round tripping is very
exactly.
serious.
The banks, the BDCs, the banks, the BDCs, you know, as the case may be. Because the point there is, if there are staff of a bank and they feel that, okay, fine, I work in the dollar section, as the case
Yes.
may be, and I can get it to one of my Aboki friends,
Mm-hmm.
whom, you know, there is no, customers come to the bank, to the counter, and they tell you, well, we don't have enough now,
Well,
so
you
you
see
might...
an Aboki
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
But
So
you see
might-
somebody who
yeah,
say,
who
I have
tells
it
you,
at
Exactly.
say by the
So
staircase.
you might, we don't have any choice. You might visit the Aboki, but he
Or
has
wait-
the interest in
or
the
wait
Aboki
for
man.
48 hours, and your flight is in 24 hours.
Exactly. So the point there is, that's the thing. It's
Yeah.
just like the black market fuel that we also talk about
Yes.
too. You don't see the fuel at the filling stations,
But
yet
you
you
see
it
people in jerrycans
and it's
selling
worse
it.
in Abuja, in places like Abuja, for instance, where the moment there's a little issue of fuel, you see the queues in Abuja before you see anywhere else.
For the black market fuel in Abuja, for me, I think it's become institutionalized. If you ask, it's become institutionalized because every other time, some people right now, I mean, the people that tell you that in 3 months they haven't been to a filling station, in and out of fuel scarcity or not, they'll tell you they haven't been to a filling station. They have somebody that's just driving by on the way to the office. and
What
they have somebody
Nigerians want is
there.
make it readily available.
Yeah, let it be available.
Make it readily available. Because I mean, right now we're also facing a lot of queues. Nobody's saying anything. Nobody's saying anything, and we're
This
suspecting
was
that
the
okay,
exact
it's an
thing
issue.
Conversation
Veronica
we
said
had.
yesterday. He said, nobody's saying anything.
Nobody's saying anything.
All right.
The NNPC, the government, the marketers, nobody's saying anything.
But
We're just
NNPC said
left.
there's enough fuel to last.
They said they have a
next
product.
few-
When
they said
have
they a
we
product.
ever not heard that? And then reverse is the reality. And a couple of minutes ago, we we're talking about trust and it not being
Confidence,
available.
yeah.
Because something as basic as providing fuel for people to be able to go. This every morning now, you go drive along the roads of Lagos to see people languishing on the roads trying to get public transportation, even when the fuel was available. Public transportation, like I tell people, is not always something that I like to see people struggle on the road for. Now there isn't fuel. The cost of transportation has gone up 2-3x. People don't have their salaries increased. Cost of things in the market has increased, and then we're saying people won't fall further into poverty. Then we're not being serious about these conversations. So I mean, like we said, nobody's saying anything. The fuel case is what it is right now. Nobody's saying anything. And some of us are speculating that, okay, because they've been hammering on it for, like, I think maybe June or July, that they want to increase the prices. Some of them have 180 on their boards.
200,
But you go there,
215,
215. My driver bought it for 212 yesterday. Had to pay for jerry can and all of that.
Yeah.
And we're saying, let it be available. You want to argue on price, no problem. But can it be available? Because you cannot add this to whatever challenges we're having right now. People are already suffering enough as it is. We cannot add this to it. Whatever it is that we can even check off the box that, okay, this is the source of my suffering, this is the source of my high BP, let us check it off the box.
All right. Let's also check off this conversation.
Yes.
Now. Policy analyst Dipo Oyewole, we must thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.